You're not going to believe what just happened. Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed master negotiator, may have just walked straight into the biggest trap of his presidency, and China was holding the blueprint, while the world watched, expecting fireworks in Washington and a final tariff showdown with Beijing. China said nothing, no statement, no retaliation, just silence. And then it happened. The U.S. postponed the talks. Trump's flagship policy, his signature 55% China tariff, suddenly delayed. No explanation. No press conference. Nothing. Just a quiet walk back from a White House that suddenly looked cornered. Why? Because China played the long game. And while Trump lashes out at U.S. allies, hitting Canada with a brutal 35% tariff, Taiwan with 20%, and even Switzerland with 39%, Beijing stands still, watching the West fall apart. From within, the G7 is cracking, U.S. inflation is climbing, and global supply chains are starting to splinter. So here's the question. Has China already won this war without firing a single shot? The blunder. Just days ago, Trump was boasting that China would buckle under his new 55% tariffs. A final, crushing blow in his campaign to bring Beijing to heel. But that meeting, the one that was supposed to finalize the agreement, China walked away. According to sources close to the talks, Beijing made it clear they weren't taking any of this seriously. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent flew in expecting negotiation. What he got was a dead end. The U.S. quietly postponed the meeting. The tariffs? Delayed. Why? Because Washington knew it couldn't afford to trigger a full-scale collapse in UCNA. Trade. Instead of regrouping, Trump retaliated, not against China, but against U.S. allies. Canada, 35% tariff. Switzerland, 39%. Taiwan, 20%. Let that sink in. Taiwan, the last real U.S. microchip partner, just got hit. This isn't a strategy. It's a meltdown in real time. The allies turn away. America's allies aren't just upset. They're furious. The G7, once the cornerstone of post-war economic unity, is now a battleground. Europe's facing 15% tariffs. Canada didn't even get a call. Switzerland, whose exports include life-saving medicine, was blindsided. Trump claims it's about fairness. But the numbers don't add up. The U.S. accused Canada of smuggling fentanyl without evidence. No hearings, no diplomacy, just punishment. Canadian exports are in free fall. Lumber, dairy, auto parts, all facing devastating losses. According to Statistics Canada, U.S. demand is collapsing. And the damage? It's long-term. Europe is no better. EU leaders, once cautious, are openly calling Trump's trade agenda economic coercion. But none of this seems to bother Washington. Tariffs are now Trump's go-to weapon, not to help American workers, but to force loyalty. And while the U.S. alienates its friends, China is securing leverage. The silent strategist? China didn't need to shout. They didn't even need to respond. While Trump storms from press conference to rally stage, China is pulling off a masterclass in restraint. No threats, no walkouts, just one strategic win after another. The clearest example? A 90-day delay on U.S. tariffs, quietly secured by Beijing. No other nation got that. How? Because China holds the cards America doesn't talk about. China's hidden power. This isn't about toys or t-shirts anymore. The U.S. economy depends on China. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, China accounted for over 16% of all American imports in 2024. Smartphones, antibiotics, car parts, everyday essentials. If those shipments stop, American shelves would go empty in weeks. Walmart has already admitted that 60% of its products are sourced from China. That's not just economic leverage. That's existential supply chain control, but it goes deeper. Rare earths. China controls nearly 70% of global production. Critical materials for EVs, fighter jets, medical equipment. If China cuts exports, like it did to Japan in 2010, the U.S. tech and defense sectors could grind to a halt. And then there's U.S. debt. In 2024 alone, China dumped over $100 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds. A clear signal. When that happened, Wall Street panicked. Treasury yields spiked. The Fed had to intervene, draining liquidity. Result? The Dow lost 600 points overnight. This isn't just trade pressure anymore. This is financial warfare. The world reacts. While Trump raises tariffs, the rest of us world is charting a new path. India, once cautious, is ignoring U.S. warnings and buying discounted Russian oil. Over 34% of its crude imports now come from Russia, up from just 2%. Pre-Ukraine war, the U.S. threatened sanctions. India didn't blink. China, meanwhile, is openly ignoring U.S. sanctions on both Russia and Iran. Oil tankers are still showing up at Iranian ports. Russian gas flows freely into Chinese factories. And the yuan is quietly replacing the U.S. dollar in global deals. Washington calls for unity. Beijing builds a parallel system. The American backlash, back home, the cracks are growing. Trump's trade war is supposed to help American workers. But it's doing the OPPOSITEUS. Consumer spending is slowing fast. In the first half of 2025, growth fell below 1%. Inflation isn't the main issue anymore. It's uncertainty. Businesses can't plan. Supply chains are jammed. And Trump's tariffs? They're not temporary. They're attacks on every American household, hidden behind political slogans. Meanwhile, healthcare providers are warning that Swiss-made medications, critical for cancer and diabetes treatment, are suddenly unaffordable due to new tariffs. No U.S. backup plan. The infrastructure doesn't exist. This is economic sabotage from within. Follow the money. Why all this chaos? One word: money. Trump's tax cuts are projected to cost $3.44 trillion over the next decade. That leaves a massive funding gap, around $340 billion a year. Tariffs are filling that hole. They're not about foreign policy. They're a backdoor tax, a way to collect revenue without calling it a tax hike. But it's working, not for Americans, but for the Treasury. And the irony? G7 allies are buying U.S. bonds to keep the dollar stable. In other words, they're funding the very government that's punishing them. Canada invests in U.S. debt. Canada gets hit with a 35% tariff. It's a double punch. First, they keep the U.S. economy afloat. Then they watch their exports burn. Enter BRICS. While the U.S. weaponizes trade, BRICS is opening the door. Countries like Brazil, India, China, and Indonesia are rapidly emerging as new trade hubs. Nations tired of unpredictable U.S. policy are turning to Beijing, not because they want to, but because they have to. Global trade isn't collapsing. It's reorganizing. And the U.S.? It's being left behind. The collapse of strategy. The system Trump built is collapsing under its own weight. The rules are so convoluted, exporters don't know what qualifies as a tariff violation. Route goods through Vietnam? 40% penalty. Source: a component from Taiwan? 20% markup. Companies are pulling out, not because they want to, but because they can't afford to stay. No one can plan in a world where the rules shift overnight, and the judge is also the executioner. And America? It's not just isolated diplomatically. It's becoming irrelevant economically. The final blow might not come from China, or even the BRICS bloc. It might come from within the U.S. economy itself, slowly bleeding competitiveness, credibility, and cohesion. Donald Trump promised too. Bring back American strength. But in this trade war, strength isn't about noise. It's about leverage, patience, precision. And China has all three. So the question isn't whether the U.S. can win a trade war. The real question is, did Trump already lose it? And is the rest of the world just waiting for the final move?